But this story, I know it to be true because I was there. And if you don't believe me, ask my father. It's actually one of his favorite stories because he's the star of the story. When I was a small boy, maybe 10 years old, I loved going fishing with my dad. Truth is, I still love going fishing with my father. Sitting in a boat on a beautiful day, even if you're not catching any fish, it's great to be outdoors, fresh air and sunshine. But I remember this day. We were rowing around on a little farm pond that we called Dragonfly Pond. And as we were rowing around, bzz, ah, bzz, ah, bzz, ah, ooh, the mosquitoes were eating me alive. Now, I'm not a whiner, but I guess maybe I was complaining a little bit too much. Because my father said, don't complain about the mosquitoes. They're just doing what they were made to do. I wanted to say, Dad, what are you talking about? But I kept my thoughts to myself. Because just a few moments later, over in the shallow water, in the cattails and lily pads, I saw something splashing around. Now, I've always been curious, trait of a good scientist. How many of you ask a lot of questions? And more important, look for your own answers? By asking the right kinds of questions with measurable outcomes and looking for your own answers, you are a scientist. You can conduct inquiry. So I inquired, what is that? What is it doing there? Why is it doing that? And I looked a little closer to find my own answers, and I saw a dragonfly nymph. Have you seen one? They look like the creature of the Black Lagoon. They're black-brown, mud-colored, and they have 6 legs, being a true insect, but their lower mandible, their lower jaws look like extra legs. And this little creature of the swamp will eat a frog or a fish, well, a tadpole or a minnow, until the minnow or tadpole is big enough to eat it. And as this ugly creature of the swamp began crawling up out of the water, right before my eyes, it crawled up the side of this cattail, right before my eyes. It crawled up out of that dark, murky swamp, and it cracked its shell, its exoskeleton. Let me pause and ask, do you have an endoskeleton or an exoskeleton? Is your skeleton on the inside, endoskeleton, or on the outside, exo? Yes, yours is on the inside. But insects and shellfish, and I understand aliens, have an exoskeleton. It cracked its shell, crawled out of its exoskeleton, and right before my eyes, transformed itself to a beautiful creature of the air. Have you seen the green darner dragonfly? They are one of the largest dragonflies you'll find in these United States. They have 4 wings, 2 on each side, that are clear. You can see through, except the black lace that holds them together. And when they hold their wings in the sunlight just right, it refracts the light to make a rainbow of colors. Well, as this creature pumped fluid into its wet, crinkly wings, as the wings slowly stretched out to dry, the dragonfly told me the rest of this story. And that's how I know it's true. Because just a few minutes later, bzz, ow, bzz, ow, ooh, the mosquitoes are eating us alive. But just then, a big, plump, red mosquito, his belly big and red with my blood, flew off. Oh, he got away. But as that mosquito flew away, that dragonfly's wings were dry. The dragonfly jumped up off that cattail, bzz, snatched up that mosquito who had eaten me, and continued flying. My dad said, a dragonfly will eat more than 1,000 mosquitoes. Let's hear it for dragonflies. He also said that they're like the hawk of the insect world. They can fly 60 miles per hour, as fast as a car on the highway. But like a helicopter, they can hover and fly perfectly still. And they also can fly backwards. And being a true insect, they have 6 legs, but they use those legs like a little basket so they can catch other bugs on the wing, much like a peregrine falcon will catch other birds in flight. Well, as that dragonfly was flying around eating deer flies and horse flies, let's hear it for dragonflies, it met another dragonfly, and they started talking about poetry and Shakespeare. And have you ever seen 2 dragonflies fly together with the tail of one touching the back of the other? You know what they're doing, don't you? Very important part of science, and that's all I'm going to say about that, except that we wouldn't be here without that part of science. Well, that dragonfly who had eaten that mosquito who had eaten me flew off by herself. And she started touching her tail to the water as she was flying. I said, Dad, what is she doing? He said she's laying eggs. I said, why does she lay so many? He said, well, they might lay 1,000 eggs. And many of those eggs don't even hatch. And the ones that do hatch, they might get eaten by a minnow or a tadpole until they're big enough to eat the tadpole or minnow. Out of 1,000 eggs, maybe only a few of them will metamorphosize into that adult dragonfly that we saw a few moments ago shed its exoskeleton. And then my father turned to me and he said, you know, if you think about it, you started off as an egg inside your mommy. All of us did. And for a while, you were a cute little larva. But then you grow up to be an ugly adolescent or a pupa. But eventually, you'll shed your exoskeleton. You'll transform yourself. Through metamorphosis, you will become an adult. Now, my father was always comparing our lives to the lives of our wild kin. But I had to stop and think, in what ways will I be transformed as I grow older? In what ways will you change or metamorphosize? Well, just then, that dragonfly must have finished laying eggs because it landed on a lily pad. And no sooner had it landed than a great big bullfrog whipped out its tongue and swallowed the dragonfly whole. You know, the frog lives in two worlds. He swims in dark pools and leaps about upon the land at dusk. He sings to the moon, hoping another frog hears his song, but mostly singing because it feels good in his throat, in his bulging throat. When he's bored or hungry, he catches little bugs with his sticky tongue, but mostly it's just a little game, catching little bugs with his sticky tongue. He loves sitting in the cool, muddy water with his toes in the mud, and his two nostrils smelling the warm, muddy night air and singing because it feels good in his throat, in his bulging throat. Shh, did you hear that? We thought we heard another frog singing, not too far away. And my dad said, part of the reason they sing, it's territorial. It's kind of like the frog saying, this is my turf, this is my turf. Well, when the frog who had eaten that dragonfly, who had eaten that mosquito, who had eaten me, heard that other frog, he started swimming across the pond. Right now, imagine you're sitting in a boat, and the only ripples are being made. Splash by a largemouth bass! A huge fish comes up from the bottom of the lake, swallows the bullfrog whole, swims off to the bottom, resting and digesting with the bullfrog in his belly. I said, Dad, did you see that? He said, yeah, let's get a little closer. And he starts rowing over towards the place where that fish had jumped. Well, I took that moment while he was rowing and I tied on my favorite lure. It's a jointed rapala carved out of balsam wood so it floats. It has a little swivel in the middle so when you wiggle it, it swims like a wounded minnow. Because if you know about predator-prey relationships, they always go for the sick or wounded. Easy catch for them, easy catch for me, or so I hoped. Well, as my father was rowing across the lake, the sun was going down. And it was one of those perfect sunset evenings. Again, could you imagine being in the boat? The sky was on fire. Ah, ah, ah. I saw a black crow fly across that blood-red sky. A bald eagle circled high overhead. A great blue heron was wading in the shallow, often standing on one leg, slowly moving forward, looking for something to eat. On the far side of the lake, I saw a raccoon catching crawdads and washing them before he ate his supper. And a huge buck, a huge deer, came down to the shore for something to drink. And I saw a spider weaving a web in the cattails along the shore. And somehow I knew, more than just know, I felt like those invisible strands of a spider's web, that all of us were connected. Raccoon and deer, eagle and crow, great blue heron. And as I took a deep breath, you can breathe in. Know that what you just breathed in was inside a tree a few moments ago. Say thank you, tree. And what you just breathed in was inside your neighbor a few minutes ago. Every time I breathe in, I breathe the outside world and myself. I felt that connection and that web of life. And just then, we got over near where that fish had jumped. And as I was watching the sunset, I got to watch the sunset twice into itself, reflected in the blood-red water, reflecting the blood-red sky. And where that fish had jumped, there were no weeds. See, most of the shoreline was covered with duckweed and lily pads, but where the fish had jumped, there was a spot about the size of a basketball hoop with no weeds. I said, Dad, if that fish is still there, it's mine. Well, my father, as if to challenge me, he said, you can't cast into that little spot from way over here. I said, watch. I'd already tied on my favorite lure, that jointed Rapala, and I stared at that spot, concentrating, meditating. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. I know I can, I know I can, I know I can. And I cast. Spoosh! It landed right on the far edge of the circle, right where I wanted it. My heart started thumping. My palms are getting sweaty. I said, Dad, if that fish is still there, it's mine. Now, my father, who taught me everything I know about fishing, he always said, when you cast a surface plug onto the water, you want to let it sit there for a while so the fish doesn't think it just fell out of the sky. Well, I waited till concentric circles had disappeared. And when the lake was smooth as glass, I reeled in the slack and I wiggled it like a wounded minnow, and nothing happened. Oh. Sometimes they'll take it that first time, but usually not. Again, I waited till the concentric circles disappeared and the lake was smooth as glass. I reeled in the slack and I wiggled it, and nothing happened. Oh. Now I was tangled on the near side on the weeds, so I gave up. You should know better. Maybe you do know better. Should never give up. Because just as I gave up, and I started, the bass took it. Sometimes he'll take it that third time. I set the hook. Woohoo! He dived down deep, trying to get away. I said, Dad, get the net ready. It's a big one. He exploded out of the water, dancing across the surface. You know why they do that? They're trying to spit out your hook, but I wouldn't let it. I kept tension on the line. I said, Dad, get the net ready. My father said, we don't have a net, son. Oh, I pulled it up under the boat. He tried to tangle me in the weeds. I got him up close to the boat, and my father reached his hands down, got his fingers into his gills. He pulled up the largest largemouth bass I have ever caught, even to this day. Now, it wasn't record, but it was a huge fish for a little boy. Now, usually we catch a big one, we let him go. My father always said, if you want there to be fish again next year, you got to let a few go this year, especially the big ones. Especially if you take all the predators, then the prey get out of balance. You need to leave a few if you want there to be fish next year. And so often we left a few go. But that was the biggest fish I ever caught. So we took it home. And when we got home, all my brothers were like, what'd you catch? What'd you catch? And I have to admit, when I held up that fish, my grin was about as big as the fish was. Now, we usually cleaned our fish on a picnic table in the backyard because my mom got tired of scales and fish guts in the sink. But my brothers all gathered around. So my dad, he decided to take advantage of the teachable moment, and he did a little dissection lesson. He showed us how when you close the mouth, the gills open. And when you close the gills, the mouth opens. Close the mouth and the gills open. Can you do fish lips? That's how a fish breathes. You breathe air, take another deep breath. You pump air into your lungs and breathe out. But fish pump water across their gills. And then he showed us how the top of the fish is dark green, but the belly of the fish is white, which is perfect camouflage for its environment. But my brother said, it shows up really well on that red picnic table. My father grinned and said, no, think about it. Have you ever swam across the top of a lake? Yeah, of course. When you look down, what do you see on the bottom? Well, it's seaweed, dark green and black mud. So the top of the fish is really dark. Have you ever swum along the bottom of a lake and looked up on a sunny day? What do you see? Sunshine, blue sky. So the belly of the fish is white. In its environment, it's perfect camouflage. And then my dad started to fillet the fish, and as he cut it open, he found a lump in its stomach. He said, hey boys, let's see what this bass has been eating. He cut open the stomach, and inside, he found a bullfrog. And inside the bullfrog, I know it was dissolved, but I imagined the dragonfly. And inside the dragonfly, already digested, bzzz, the mosquito who had eaten me. And as we settled into supper that night, a nice big slab of bass on everybody's plate. That was a big fish. Of course I shared with my brothers, my family. As we settled into that moment of silence before we eat, as we often did, I thought about what my father said earlier in the day. And of course he was right. When you feed the mosquito, you feed the song of the frog and the splash of the largemouth bass. And when I dove into that fish, I knew then and always they would also be a part of me. The web at Dragonfly Pond.